We have measures in place to help maintain the integrity of the event. Should there be any kind of disturbance, we hope that won't happen, but if it did, please bear with us and we will restore order shortly. My colleague Sophie will assist with that as she's letting all of you into the room right now. Unless you're speaking, we suggest that you place yourself on mute to allow for a smooth interaction between the moderator, speakers, and participants. As each panelist takes the floor, they will turn on their video and their sound. And in the interactive session, when you're taking the floor, if you can turn on your video and your sound, we welcome that. If it's just your sound, we understand that none of us have had our pets in a long time, so completely at your choice. When entering the call, please ensure your name appears clearly. That will help us to call on you. So there's a rename function on the participants button. You'll see that we've already got 87 participants in today's session. So you just pop in there, look at your phone number or the other way in which you may be described, and if you can convert that to your name, that will help us to call on you more effectively than a long line of other names or numbers. The question and answer session at the end of the panel will be using the raise a hand feature, which is also based in your participant list. So we will want you to raise the hand and we'll capture who's trying to take the floor. And in the chat room, we will also welcome any comments. A very able moderator, Christine Negra, will be managing the question and answer session in the first part, and then we'll have a highly interactive session in the second half. We still have quite a few people joining the line, so if you'll bear with me, I'll just run through very quickly the agenda for today and then do a quick reminder of the technical issues. With regards to the slides, there are relatively few slides today, but we are happy to make them available if you send your contact information either through your pre-registration. We likely have it, or you can send it to us separately. Today's opening, we will play a brief video related to food systems from the Special Envoy. Then we will look forward to remarks by His Excellency Dr. Suazo from the UNITAR. We'll make a few introductory comments related to the food system, and then we have our very distinguished panel talking about different aspects of the food system, following by a moderated question and answer. That will take up approximately the first hour of the session. And then we will move to an interactive session where we will engage you in a variety of polls, a variety of interactive elements, and then bring that home with a final poll on what we might focus the Food Systems Summit on. So with that in mind, one last housekeeping message and we'll get started. Just to remind everybody, we want to make sure that you are keeping yourself on mute and with your video off until you are taking the floor, in which case we ask you to put both of those on. If there is a disturbance, please do bear with us. We will restore order shortly. Unless speaking, as we mentioned, mute, and then if you could go into the participant section and make sure that your name appears so that when we need to call on you, we can do so. And in that participants area at the bottom of your screen, where your mute and stop video function are, you can go in there and actually raise your hand if you would like to take the floor and ask a question. If you have other questions, feel free to put them in the chat room and we'll be trying to capture those, and the moderator, Dr. Christine Negra, will be interacting with the participants. So with that in mind, welcome to this training session on food systems. We're going to start off with a video from the Special Envoy to the United Nations on food systems. Irina. Irina, could you unmute yourself?
My name is Agnes Kalibata. I'm the UN Secretary General Special Envoy for the 2021 Food Systems Summit. Food is more than what we eat. It's more than what satisfies our hunger. It's more than what nourishes our bodies and our brains. It's more than a cultural centerpiece. It's more than an Instagram picture. Food is water. Food is land. Food is our culture. Food is labor. Food is technology. It's economies and it's policies. Food is everything. Today, the way we produce, process, and consume food, what experts call food systems, is a paradox. Over the last 50 years, our ability to produce food has gone up by nearly 300%. However, the number of hungry people has increased to 820 million people in the last 3 years alone. We're not eating well. About 2 billion people are obese or have food-related diseases. Furthermore, we waste 35% of the food we produce, equivalent to $936 billion annually. That said, our ability to produce food is at threat. Climate change is massively interfering with food systems globally, causing droughts, floods, and massive fires around the world. And our current food system is part of the problem. It contributes 30% of the greenhouse gases. If we are to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in the remaining time, our food systems must change. This is why I'm humbled and excited to serve as the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the 2021 Food Systems Summit. My vision for the summit is that we must fast track and commit to ambitious ways of coming through on the SDGs. I'll be looking to bring consensus on what future food systems must look like given the challenges. I'll be looking for agreement and alignment on the dramatic shifts that we know must happen. The prospects of what we can do together excites me. First, we must end hunger. Second, we must commit to more inclusive and healthier food systems. Third, we must safeguard the health of our planet. We don't have a choice, we have run out of time. As the special envoy, I will steward the voice of many of you that deal with food systems every day. We need to change. We need to be bold. We want to engage each and every one of you. Please make your voice heard. Speak up.
Thanks. I understand from the chat that several of you had a hard time hearing the audio. Sorry about that. It was closed captioned as well, so hopefully you could read it as we went as well. As the video is posted online at YouTube, so we would encourage you to watch it a second time if you have a chance. So with that, I'd like to call upon His Excellency Marco Suazo from UNITAR to bring some opening remarks related to food systems. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Robbie, very much for the invitation. As I mentioned before, UNITAR and Emerging has been working in the last 3 years producing this kind of conversations, dialogue, and training, if we wanted to call it like that, in order to tackle one of the most essential elements of our development, which is agriculture, food chains, and food deliveries. So I am very pleased to see all the panelists that Robbie managed to put it together to us. I am 100% sure that we're going to have a very enlightened conversation. And in this kind of events, I became actually all the time a student. I try to learn the best from the others because I am not an agricultural expert, even though I come from an agricultural country and I was raised in a little coffee plantation with my grandfather. So I know how to plant, I know the value of the food that we produce ourselves, but the scale in which we are talking now it's something that I have to learn, and I have to confess that. So this collaboration has been very productive between Emerging and UNITA. And so we hope to continue. It's something that I believe strongly about strengthening institutions that work together in order to deliver the sustainability that we humans need. And at this point, I would like to talk to an issue, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. I call it this perfect storm, the holistic enemy, because he attacked us on an individual basis, he killed us humans. But at the same time, he damaged our economic environment, he damaged our infrastructure, he damaged our personal relations. And so when an enemy like this appears in our horizon, we are not normally prepared. And the first things that we try to do is to come together to join efforts and strengthen our capacities in order to survive. In this case, this invisible enemy, this virus, has put humankind to reflect in a new way of life. And of course, being agriculture and food, as essential as it is for our survival, is very imperative and important that we really put our minds in the new food and agricultural systems. I was very pleased when I see the video. I didn't know what it was about, but of course it's about the Food System Summit that the Secretary General had in mind for 2021. And I am 100% sure that whatever was thought about that summit, he's been rethinking and has been redrafting because there is a need to have a more holistic approach. We saw the statistics that were given through the presentation. And needless to say that recently in April 21st, I guess, the World Food Program launched a recent report on food production. And it says that an acute hunger will double by 250 million people by the end of 2020. And also says that food insecurity will rise to 265 million people by 2020. This is an increase of 130 million out of the 130 that we have, 135 million that we have in 2019. So that shows how dramatic the impact of these pandemics will be for us. You hear that the first response that governments made on this crisis was to secure health systems and protecting gear for our healthcare providers, nurses, doctors, hospitals, and we were in very dear shortage of that everywhere in the world. Well, the same is happening with food production, food delivery, and actually consumption. So we have to think also the way of consumption of food. You saw the statistic that was shown today, how much is wasted every year. Where are people going on hunger because they don't have enough food? Robbie was put a question at the beginning, but it will be the biggest question that we can put it to the panelists to reflect on it today. And for me was, well, that's the question, how we can do better us as human beings to change this pattern that has been developed by countries, by corporations, by individuals in order to change this relation with our environment, with our food, and with the needs of billions of people around the world. So if we can reflect a little bit on this point, I will be more than happy. And for our panelists, for the different agencies present, for the academia, in any way we can help or we can disseminate this message, count with us. We are an institute for training and research, and mostly we support government, NGOs, individuals that would like to share their knowledge to the others. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Robbie, Emerging. Thank you very much to our panelists. and I wish you a very well conversation. And I'm 100% sure that we will get a few answers and a common sense on a few things that we are puzzled now. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And your experience growing up on a farm is one that informs your passion for food. We have several people who are actually from farms on this call today, and I think it brings a certain practicality to the conversation, as well as the fact that I understand you have skills to now help us all learn how to garden on a virtual basis, which is a skill that we all need. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
So you were speaking to COVID, and my next slide is one of the elements related to that. My own name is Robin Anderson. I am the president of Emerging Ag. In that role, I have the good fortune to coordinate the International Agri-Food Network, as well as work with a wide array of groups in agricultural research, science, and all focused on food, health, and nutritional security. And when we've been talking about COVID, next slide, we are seeing a few very distinct disruptions to the food chain. First of all, there is an immediate concern about the ability to keep food moving within countries and from outside of countries. And one of the things that we've heard a lot about is the need to have domestic food security. But in fact, FAO has been showing that some very good management of global food supplies has also helped to even the access to food through the worst of this early phase of the situation. But there are issues that could affect food security long term. First of all, we need to make sure that farmers and small and medium enterprises, who are the backbone of the food supply chain, also get social protection. Many of the unemployment insurance and related issues actually only apply to those who have conventional employment. We need to make sure farmers who themselves are experiencing disruptions need to be able to deal with that. We also need to consider that food service is an essential service, and that's one thing that the governments have really done quite well. Early in the response, they said food service was essential. We've also seen the ability to make an opportunity for people to look down that supply chain. So at first, seed and fertilizers and some of the things you need to get a crop planted, and temporary workers to assist with harvest and planting might not have been included in those essential services. And increasingly, governments are adjusting to make sure that we don't have an echo of challenges because we weren't able to get the crop in the ground if you're from North America or Europe, or the crop off the fields if you're in parts of Africa and the South. One other element is, of course, taking a stronger One Health approach, understanding that we need to manage illnesses in livestock as well as in human populations and to attract them effectively. And also, just a quick note to remind everybody that these are not the only set of food security challenges we're facing right now. We have issues related to ongoing protracted crises in Syria and Yemen that have not abated. We have locusts affecting the Horn of Africa. We've had radical weather changes in a range of places, including the Sahel. So it's really important to keep focused on the fact that there are a lot of food security challenges in front of all of us. And with that in mind, I want to put a few questions to you right off the hop. So our first question will be related to different aspects of the food system. And we hear this a lot. In fact, when last time I was in New York, which feels like a long time ago now, but was just a few months ago, there were discussions about, is it rural versus urban? Is it about consumers in the food system? Is it about farmers? Is it about hungry or obesity? Can we feed the planet, or are we destroying the planet? So we want to put a poll up, and we'll have many more of these in the second hour of our session. But we're just going to get a quick feel from all of you about which aspects of the food system you think are most important. So Sophie, if you could launch that poll. So all of you will be able to see this poll. So you just start clicking on it and it will allow you to vote. And you have to pick which form of malnutrition is important to tackle, hunger or obesity, or both. Which is more important, rural or urban agriculture, rural, urban, or both? And if you keep going through as you start voting, I see 7 or 8 of you have started voting already. We'll leave this up for a little bit and get you all to participate. At this point, about half of you have voted, so keep on going. All right, I think the answers have started slowing down now. So Sophie, if you could end the poll in another 5 seconds, and then we'll share the results. So as all of you can see, the vast majority of people said that we need to tackle both hunger and obesity. A third said hunger in particular. In rural and urban, we saw that 30% said rural, 5% said urban, and 65% said both. On the feeding people or the planet, overwhelmingly they're both. 86% of the participants said we have to do both. And who's more important, the farmer or the consumer? 16% said farmers, 3% said consumers, and 81% said both. So we'll stop sharing those results and we'll move on to the next slide. Thank you all. And next slide. So one of the things that's very reassuring about that is the fact is those are false dichotomies. We need both, and all of you, for the most part, weighed in on that it is not one or the other, but it is all of them. We need the planet to produce our food. We need to be fed. We're going to have to find ways to do that effectively. And a lot of progress is already being made in many of these areas, as I think you'll hear, but there is a lot more to be done. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. So Zach Blecher has joined us. He is the Food and Nutrition Advisor in the Executive Office of the Secretary General and the Office of the Special Envoy. Many of you will know Zach from his time at IFAD, which is the International Fund for Agricultural Development, where he has been in the New York Liaison Office, and prior to that with the NGO branch. Zach, it's a great pleasure to have you on the line. We look forward to you explaining a little bit about what's being planned on the Food System Summit.
Okay, I'm going to hope that everyone can hear me, and thanks, Robin, for the opportunity to speak here today. It's really an honor to be with everyone and to speak alongside the experts and leaders that are going to follow me. It's also good to follow on from the Special Envoy of the Secretary General, the video you played earlier, Dr. Kalibata, as I think that video helped lay out some of the vision for the Food System Summit in 2021, which is what I'll focus my time on in an effort to help frame out the background, ambition, and purpose a bit more and point to the road ahead from what's still a relatively early stage. So on the background, I'll pick up a bit from what the director of the UNITAR office and Robin spoke about, and that's why I'm speaking to you over Zoom today, and that's obviously because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this pandemic isn't only a health crisis, but a human crisis. And as the pandemic takes its toll on lives and livelihoods around the world, it risks becoming a global food emergency. And as you heard in the video, this is unfolding on top of what was already pre-COVID a daily crisis for the more than 820 million people in the world who are chronically food insecure, as well as those coping with other forms of malnutrition, such as obesity, and the millions struggling against poverty and injustice and the onset of the impacts of climate change. The pandemic's further exposed dangerous deficiencies and fragilities in our food systems, as Robin was speaking about. And as countries and communities seek to respond, recover, and build back from the crisis they face, a choice. They can return to normal or build back better. So as a foundational element of the Decade of Action to deliver the SDGs by 2030, the Food Systems Summit recognizes that we can transform our world in the next decade, but only by working together. Only together can we end extreme poverty, win the race against climate change, and conquer injustice and gender inequality. Together, we can embrace the complexity of our modern world and the food systems that support it, and take action to correct imbalances and ensure equity and inclusion for all people. So given the interconnected nature of the challenge before us, delivery on this promise requires urgent action taking a systemic approach. We know that solutions exist to change the unsustainable patterns of our food systems in a way that enhances inclusive economic growth and opportunity, while also safeguarding the global ecosystems that sustain life. I think the subsequent speakers will speak in more detail to this, and certainly the science supports this. For example, in the 2019 Global Sustainable Development Report, scientists identified food systems and nutrition as one of the few key entry points we have to accelerate the worldwide transition to a more sustainable trajectory. The Food Systems Summit will seek to leverage the power of a food systems approach across the 3 dimensions of sustainable development to mobilize all stakeholders to work together to not just build back, but to build forward towards the future we want. So when we think about raising and framing our ambition, we already have that in a sense. It's to reach the SDGs by 2030 and keep the world below 1.5 degrees warming. This means that all stakeholders, every government, organization, and individual needs to do more. It's important to recall that the SDGs are indivisible from one another and represent an integrated framework that highlights that progress or regression in one area does not happen in isolation of others. As Robin was just reminding us, the food system encompasses the entire range of actors and their interconnected activities in feeding a population. Everything from growing, harvesting, packing, processing, storing, marketing, consuming, and disposing of food. Many factors shape a food system, including infrastructure, transport, financial services, information, technology, natural resources in the environment, the economy, as well as the preferences of consumers, culture, policies, politics, and more. Actions to reshape food systems will need to be taken at different levels of governance and will look different by location. They should account for the particular needs of various groups, such as women, small-scale producers, and other types of farmers, youth, and indigenous peoples. Since food systems affect every aspect of human life, actions to transform them can lead the way in showing us what sustainable development in all its dimensions can actually look like. It gives us an opportunity to move past rhetoric, build on the evidence, and dig down into the trade-offs and nexus points that we'll have to manage to create better food systems that will create a better future for everyone, everywhere. So, to boost ambition and accelerate action, the Food Systems Summit will focus on driving new commitments for progress. The actions identified at the end of the summit process should be those that can be implementable at scale and transform food systems at different levels while being relevant and adapted for multiple stakeholders. So in short, the summit process will present an offer of a space to share and learn across constituencies with a view to supercharge progress by fostering new partnerships and amplifying existing initiatives. For now, it's envisioned the summit would have at least the following outcomes. First, to raise awareness of how central food systems are to the whole sustainable development agenda and the urgency of food systems transformation for all people everywhere. Second is to align stakeholders around a common understanding of a food system framework as a foundation for concerted action towards the SDGs. The third would be to motivate and empower stakeholders who actively and appropriately support food systems transformation at all levels. And fourth, catalyze, accelerate, and scale action to transform current food systems into a healthier, more inclusive, equitable, and environmentally sustainable food system. To be clear, this is not a summit in the traditional sense. There won't be a negotiated outcome at the end of this. We already have the 2030 agenda, which was negotiated at great length and detail. Instead, this is about mobilization, raising ambition, and supercharging solutions. We hope to really kick off the process this summer, ideally over the course of June. There will be different avenues for engagement at country, regional, and global levels. There'll also be an effort to make this as diffuse an approach as possible to allow different and diverse constituencies to engage in ways that are relevant to food systems in their own context. The precise timing of the summit is still to be decided by the Secretary General, as we continue to see the best way to adapt in light of all the shifts in the global calendar over the anticipated run-up to the summit. The location is secondary to the work itself. The summit's not about one moment as much as it will be an effort to change and elevate the global narrative around our relationship with food systems, particularly in light of COVID. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zach. It's certainly a very timely moment for the summit to be underway and for the preparations to be coming along. We look forward to those announcements. And to bring home the importance of that, we're going to call next on Lindiwe Sabanda. Lindiwe is an expert well known across the range of the agri-food sectors. She is currently co-chair of the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture. She is a member of the Champions program for the SDGs. She is well known on issues related to nutrition and healthy diets, and she is actually at home on her farm in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe. Dr. Lindiwe.
Thank you, Robin. I've been asked to address the issue of food for all. And for me, once we talk food for all, we are really talking about Sustainable Development Goal number 2, which is zero hunger. But then it's important to unpack what we mean by food for all and zero hunger. So allow me to just unpack a bit in terms of what do we mean about food for all. Number one, the food has to be available. So thanks to the poll where we asked, is it farmers or consumers that are important? It's both, but we have to have sustainable production. Number two, is it accessible? Are those that are not producing the food able to purchase? Are those that are producing the food, that's our farmers, able to produce enough to feed themselves all year round? So those are the access issues. And if you're poor, Sustainable Development Goal number 1 is that you will be compromised, you will not be able to access the food. Number 3, it's really about the stability of supplies. There's no point producing enough for the first 2 months and then you have a begging bowl for the rest of the year. So it's critical that we have to look at the sustainability and stability of our supplies. But fourth and most important to me is the utilization. Unfortunately, in most of where I come from in Africa, when we talk about food for all, we are talking about the quantity of the food. And when we talk about quantity, overemphasis has been on the cereals. Yet utilization is about really feeding for nourishment. And that talks to diversity of the food supply, and that talks to Sustainable Development Goal number 3, which speaks to health. I've only touched on about 3 of the SDGs, but one thing we know and one thing I believe is that all 17 Sustainable Development Goals speak to the issue of food. So if we don't address the issue of food, we will fail on all the SDGs because food is fundamental. Now, a quick tour of where we are right now. We speak, as we heard in the opening address by Dr. Agnes Kalibata, the Special Envoy. We are already sitting on 821 million people who go to bed hungry every day. We already have over 2 billion people who are malnourished, and this manifests itself as obesity. We are wasting over 1/3 of the food that we are producing. And it has been said that if food loss and waste was a country or a continent on its own, it will be contributing to a magnificent amount of the greenhouse gases that we are already producing to compromise production and to cause climate change. So what is it that we need to be doing? Number one, we need to be dealing with the issue of pervasive poverty. SDG number 1 is right on our face. We need to be creating safety nets. Where I am in Africa, 1 in 5 people do not have safety nets. We need to be addressing the issue of chronic hunger. 1 in 5, again, out of the 1.2 billion people in Africa are going to bed hungry. And that's already contained in the 821 million people we are talking about worldwide. Our supply chain is broken. We need to fix it. And the corona pandemic has not helped because we are heading for a global economic slump, which means there will be more people who are poor, there will be more people who cannot access food, there will be more people who are going to bed hungry every day. What this calls for is a recalibration of our livelihoods. 3 things need to change. We need to recalibrate our economic metrics. We need to recalibrate our social metrics. We need to recalibrate our environmental metrics. And one thing that corona pandemic has taught us is that, yes, we can do it. It can be done. We have witnessed for the first time a cleaner environment. We have witnessed for the first time worry around food waste, where markets have been closed and trade has been restricted. So basically, in answering the question, can we transform the global food system to support the environment, human health, and welfare? Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lindwe. Really compelling figures, but also made all the more compelling by the kind of work that you're doing in Bulawayo on COVID response. They're very lucky to have a scientist and a leader like you in the town mounting this kind of solution. And we hope that there's good news out of the food security elements of that you're working on as well. With that, I'd like to call on Dr. Larte. Anna Larte is the Director of Nutrition for FAO and has been a leader in really helping us to understand the kind of questions that Lindwe was referencing about the need to have more diverse and healthy diets. Dr. Larte?
Thank you very much, Robin. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. I'd like to start by making 3 points. First is that our food systems are failing us in many fronts, and it's been said on this presentation. But I would like to focus on the part on diets, healthy diets. Now, when you look at this slide, this is what Sophie from the UN, it tells us that although the world produces enough food, we have about 800 million, over 800 million people who go to bed hungry. Not only that, about 2 billion people do not have access to quality diet. And as a result, next slide, as a result, we see that diet has now become the biggest cause of disease and death globally. But when you disaggregate this data, you see the same pattern in low income and middle income or high income countries. I want you to focus on the bar at the top, the blue. These are the dietary risk factors contributing more to disease and death in humans. Next slide, please. So this is in high income countries. Next. And low. So you can see that it cuts across everywhere that poor diet is actually a big problem for us. The second point I'd like to mention is that we've talked a lot about COVID. COVID has showed us that our food systems are weak, and we all know within 3 months of its emergence, we have seen huge disruptions in our food systems, pushing millions into deep food insecurity and poverty. And Lindewe and others have mentioned that. The third point I want to talk about is that COVID has shown that the way we eat matters. COVID has shown that the way we eat matters. An opinion piece that was released last week by a group of top nutritional epidemiologists in the US said this, and I quote, "Doctors and scientists are discovering two common characteristics among many of those who are losing the battle to COVID. They are overweight or obese and suffer from some chronic disease." In their analysis, they said 94% of the deaths from COVID in the US, for example, are due to underlying age-related chronic diseases, mostly caused by excess body fat. Ladies and gentlemen, the call for full systems transformation for healthy diets and improved nutrition has never been louder and more urgent. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, how should we eat? What is healthy diet? How should we be eating? A number of studies have come out trying to look at relating our diet to our health. Let's look at the next slide, my last slide. Now, several have talked about making dietary shifts. The dietary shifts being recommended are that we need to double our consumption of fruits and vegetables. This is a high call for the world because we don't produce enough of this. So that's where the food systems thinking comes in. Make sure we are producing enough to enable people to eat what we want them to eat. So we need to increase our consumption of fruits and vegetables. We need to eat nuts, legumes, seeds, fish, and some dairy. There's a call for a reduction in the consumption of some foods, such as red meat and sugar. WHO recommends consumption of sugar less than 10 grams per day, and moderation in consumption of processed meat. Let me say a little bit about animal source foods. Consumption of animal source foods, we know that animal source foods are good, they have some health benefits, but in nutrition, anything that is consumed in excessive amounts causes problems. In some parts of the world, the consumptions are too much and they need to decrease. In other parts of the world, they are not consuming enough so that they need to increase their consumption of some of these animal source foods. Now, what are the benefits of changing our diets? These are our benefits. The benefits are that we can save, next slide please, we can save about 11 million adults' deaths per year when we shift our diet, our consumption. We're talking about COVID. We need healthy diets to build immune systems to fight infections such as COVID-19. And in conclusion, I'll say that we need to transform our food systems to deliver healthy diets. There is no time to waste if we want to achieve the SDGs. And let's not forget, we also have the decade of action on nutrition, which we need to achieve, and we have to start moving. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lartigue. A very passionate and clear description of the complexity of diets. I think that practicality is needed. People feel like they have different kinds of information. And I'm happy to say I had lentils for dinner last night. So I'm following your good advice. With that, I'd like to call on Craig Hansen, who is the Vice President of Food, Forests, Water, and Oceans at the World Resources Institute. Craig, we'd love to see your video on and your sound on, and we look forward to your description about something that you're equally passionate about as Dr. Lartigue is, about a decade of action on nutrition. Can you talk to us a little bit about how to get nature-based solutions into our agriculture system?
Certainly, certainly. And thank you, Robin, for the kind introduction, and welcome everyone to this important session. And nature-based solutions and food systems, they go together, right? We're not going to actually be able to feed the planet unless we also support nature in helping us to do so. One thing we've looked at the World Resources Institute is this big question we all face, which is how is the world going to feed 10 billion people by the year 2050 in a manner that actually reduces pressure that the agricultural system has on the planet, while also advancing economic development for farmers, for nations, and also helps ensure that food is adequate and nutritious for the world's consumers. And one thing we've seen, which fits very well with the theme of today's session, is that a healthy food system is also a productive food system, and it also relies upon a very strong natural base. And in fact, we will not succeed in feeding 10 billion people by the year 2050 unless we also ensure that that food base is actually sustainable, which means a big shift from where we are today. Just think about it. You know, a quarter of all the greenhouse gas emissions on the planet arise from the human quest for food, primarily through direct emissions from agriculture, as well as the emissions from land use change driven primarily by agriculture. Agriculture uses about a quarter of all the fresh water that humans extract from the planet every year. And if you think about the food loss and waste, the land area required to grow all the food that we actually end up losing and wasting is about the size of China, if not larger. And so if you look at agriculture driving a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions, food loss and waste, right, a quarter of all the world's fresh water that we use, as well as the land area the size of China, it tells us we have quite an inefficient system that makes it hard for the planet to achieve not only the SDGs, but also the Paris Agreement, as well as the Convention on Biological Diversity, given the fact that, again, the human quest for food is the leading driver of habitat loss, which is itself the leading driver of biodiversity loss. So 3 messages I would have as we think about the upcoming Food Systems Summit, as well as strategies for achieving a sustainable food system that is truly nature-based, are the following. First, we need to make the most of what is already produced. And here I'm talking about, as previous speakers mentioned, reducing the vast amounts of food loss and waste the planet already experiences. Reducing that food loss and waste, ensuring what is grown makes into a person's stomach is a means of ensuring food security, improving nutrition, as well as reducing wasteful resources on the planet. In addition, in terms of making the most of what is already produced, we also need to ensure that what we eat is actually healthy. And here I'm referring to the shift to healthier diets the previous speaker was talking about. This is fundamental and essential for ensuring that nature can continue to actually be the basis for our food systems by mid-century. If we continue eating the way we do, it leads to excessive pressure on the planet in terms of water, in terms of natural resources, and natural ecosystems that get converted. We do need to pursue that healthy diet that we've heard from the Eat Lancet report, the World Resources Report, the Food and Land Use Coalition, and the previous speaker. Secondly, we need to pursue sustainable production. There are a number of methods for reducing the environmental impacts on the food system that also help support nature and nature-based solutions. Here I'm talking about getting trees more integrated into food systems through agroforestry and silvopastoral systems. Here I'm talking about improving soil and water management. 2 of the fundamental ingredients to a healthy food system is the soils we have, and it takes a long time for nature to create soils, so we need to conserve and sustainably manage the soils we actually have. Likewise, water is so fundamental to agricultural systems, so we need to capture, harvest, and store and sustainably use the water resources that are available. Another action for helping to pursue sustainable production is to ensure that the nitrogen fertilizer that we actually apply to farming systems actually gets used by the plant and doesn't run off into the waterways or into the atmosphere through things like more judicious use of fertilizers, more natural fertilizers, technologies like nitrification inhibitors. There are approaches available to ensure that the nutrients we actually do provide to support our crop-based systems actually goes to the crops and not back out into nature as a form of pollution. And finally, we need to ensure that while we produce, we also need to protect. This is what I call the produce and protect deal, right? We need to sustainably produce more food for the planet by the year 2050, but at the same time, we need to conserve the natural ecosystems that remain. The 2 have to go hand in hand. While we boost yields and boost sustainability of the food we produce, we also need to conserve and protect the great tropical rainforests and savannas of the planet that are at the forefront of being converted as we speak to grow more food for the planet. So we need to produce and protect. So 3 things: make the most of what we already produce. Secondly, pursue sustainable production. And thirdly, produce and protect. Those, in my view, are three nature-based solutions for helping us to sustainably feed the planet by mid-century. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Craig. Really great synopsis, and I love how you pulled together the variety of the issues, right from the production systems through food loss and waste. Craig, I hope you'll be able to stay with us 5 or 10 minutes longer. We're running just a touch behind time. I'd like to call on Natasha Hayward and then have a few more minutes for the panel at the end. Natasha?
Hi, Robin. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I hope that my sound and my video is working. You're able to hear me. As others have said, it's a real pleasure to be a panelist and part of this discussion. And what I'm going to spend my few minutes really reflecting on, to take the conversation a little further, is on livelihoods, livelihoods in particular of small producers. But I think an important backdrop to my segment, but I think the whole conversation, is just to recognize, with respect to food systems, that we are presently seeing, or have been seeing, significant underinvestment in agriculture and food systems overall. This has persisted especially in fragile and low-income countries. We've seen it in terms of ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, which has been dropping in the last year or two, and for which agriculture already occupies a modest share of total ODA against other sectors. And we're not seeing a particularly great picture domestically otherwise either. For those of you familiar with, for example, the CAADP commitments on the continent of Africa, which aim at 10% domestic public spending on agriculture and food, in the last review, only 4 countries on the continent met that goal. And I think it's important to reflect on this overall investment picture because right now, even prior to COVID-19, there have been and are significant costs to our underinvestment in food systems. And the pandemic now, I would say, is just serving to amplify those costs and to amplify and underline the need for additional and focused investment in agriculture and food systems. As other panelists have said, as Robin said in the introduction, COVID-19 is not just impacting public health, but also livelihoods and food and nutrition security. We've seen in all our country contexts, I should think, that the necessary containment measures that are being put in place have and are having significant livelihoods impacts and are leading to significant income losses for many, many people. And there are associated food and nutrition security risks inherent in that. And as Anna and Lindway and others have spoken to, this comes on top of a pre-existing situation of significant food security challenge. In order to respond, I would say, of course, that there is a two-pronged approach needed. Rightly, as of now, countries are concerned with an emergency response, the immediate medical and public health steps that are needed in response to the pandemic, and the associated social protection measures with respect to the income and livelihoods losses. But what I think is important to underscore in the broader food systems context is that in addition to those immediate responses, we also need to be thinking about the medium to longer term and about that critical investment in longer term resilient livelihoods, particularly of those working in our agriculture and food systems. The immediate responses that we're seeing now, I think probably wherever you're located, you're seeing your own government take action with respect to social protection. Here I'm sitting in the US, we've seen a massive policy response, one-off payments being made to many members of the population. Also food distribution, adjustments to cash transfer systems to remove previous conditionalities. Sectorally, and in the program that I work for, the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, we're also seeing immediate responses, whether it's about utilizing existing community-based structures to channel, for example, distribution of seeds and fertilizers to try and protect the next season's crops. So all these immediate measures are non-negotiable and absolutely critical. But as I said, I would say they shouldn't be addressed in isolation of investment in the medium term. And that investment in the medium term really needs to focus on resilience and livelihoods, especially of small producers in the food system. Building on what Craig said just immediately before me, that investment also has to recognize the multiple stresses that smallholders were already under. It's the produce and protect theme, Craig, that you spoke to. Even before the present pandemic, we acknowledged that the figures per Sophie were going in the wrong direction in terms of food security, and that what has been driving those figures are these stresses in terms of climate vulnerabilities and indeed broader fragility. So there are stresses on both producers and planet. And so if we think about resilient livelihoods, it has to be a package that pays attention to all of those cross-cutting issues that arguably are part of the resilience story. It's the nutrition that Anna spoke to. It's gender, of course, in terms of women producers or the additional constraints that female farmers face. And it is, of course, climate and the nature-based solutions, how to produce more within our existing planetary footprint. So resilience and resilient livelihoods really have to recognize all these interconnected fronts as they relate to producers in the food system. My final point is just to say, in doing so, how do you respond? How do you do that? I think part of the answer is around a range of corresponding investment tools, to go back to my first theme. These investments, shouldn't just be led by government only or private sector only. It has to be concerted investment along the value chain and delivered by and through all the different partners in the process. So government clearly has responsibilities, but we would like to encourage the private sector to be present there too. And for me, private starts with farmers themselves, who are private actors, but who are also trying to self-organize in a way that captures efficiencies and allows them to gain access to markets. So yes, thank you very much. And let me pass it back to Robin at this point.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Could we trouble you to stay on the line for a few more minutes? I know we're coming up to the hour.
Not at all.
Wonderful. So will you set up the introduction to Rick perfectly? Because he is a farmer, as well as chairing the private sector mechanism of the UN Committee on Food Security. Rick, do you want to pick up on some of those themes, the importance Natasha was talking about investing in agriculture?
Sure, I'll do that, Robin. Sorry, I had to change devices here. Do you hear me okay?
Great.
All right. Thank you very much. And yes, excuse me. As a farmer, I am struck by the challenges we're facing in the food system. Gaps on grocery store shelves, flour mills struggling to get 3-kilogram bags on the shelf instead of 50, being declared essential services, which food is, but having no way to source masks and gloves, and needing to move to 24-hour shifts to achieve social distancing at food facilities. All extra efforts to get the same amount of food out the door. And now we have late springs here, a terrible harvest for us last year, and one of the worst outbreaks of locusts globally. Farmers are managing the uncertainty and increased risk to the best of their ability. But as a farmer and farm organization leader, I can tell you it is very, very tough out there. But one thing I can say that is heartening is that people have generally remained fed. Working around the clock and creative solutions have proven that the food system performs even under the worst conditions. The challenge is agricultural disruptions are not measured in 30 or 90 days. They are measured in harvest seasons. Crops going in the ground now and coming off the ground in other parts of the world will tell the tale. Losses in fruits, vegetables, meat and dairy, all those perishable products won't be made up. Farmers are bearing those costs and they can only do it for so long. It is particularly worrisome because in most places there is no special or social protection for farmers. As they are self-employed, they don't get unemployment insurance or other similar support systems. All this is in the face of 4 consecutive years of increases in the number of hungry. We're walking backward on Sustainable Development Goal 2. The Food Systems Summit is very timely, and we hope it will consider focusing on how to strengthen supply chains. A food system really is what we used to call a supply chain. It takes in everyone and everything to produce the food. Soil, crops, crop inputs, I should say, such as seeds and fertilizer, farmers, storage, grain handlers, logistics, processing, retailing, and consumers. All those things come into play. But in particular today, I want to encourage you to think about livelihoods and the investment needed to support them. 80% of the people living in multidimensional poverty are in rural areas. There is need to foster rural resilience and put farmers first. With more economic opportunity and connectivity to markets through functioning supply chains, we can empower women, attract and keep youth in agriculture, and improve the livelihoods of many of the world's most vulnerable. A lack of access to sufficient education and skills training in rural areas leads to shortages of opportunities for advancement. Agriculture is fundamentally a knowledge-based sector, and more investment needs to be placed on extension services and innovation. Resilience to disasters, including the COVID-19 pandemic, is key, and measuring income impacts for post-disasters is an important metric. Effective public-private, and civil society partnerships that mobilize and share knowledge, expertise, and technology, and financial resources are essential to support the achievement of the SDGs. Rural areas suffer from the largest proportion of poverty, and rural women remain furthest behind in achieving the SDGs. Agriculture has been receiving a shrinking proportion of development assistance, and this trend needs to be reversed. The UN should be more proactive in fostering an environment for responsible agricultural investment. Recruiting and retaining youth in agriculture should be a priority. Addressing this issue supports retention of populations in rural areas, improves the future of food production, and is only possible when access to services and the standard of living of farmers and agricultural workers is decent and comparable to that of other professions. In addition to the points I just mentioned, the interventions that really are needed, in addition to the above, are access to financial capital, which is an issue for all farmers, particularly for many women and young people in developing countries. Access to domestic markets due to poor infrastructure and lack of cold chain logistics that compound food safety issues. Access to international markets resulting from poor infrastructure, trade, policy, and protracted crisis. And finally, access to digital and biological technologies that can advance the transition to more sustainable food systems. With this in mind, it is clear there is a need to scale up our efforts to increase investment in agriculture and rural areas, create robust and innovative partnerships, and improve supply chains and access to markets. The food systems need to be built to foster rural resilience, support farmers, and help more countries grow their agricultural economies. Thank you, Robin. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Rick. I think that dovetailed very nicely with what Natasha was saying, and it was great to hear that youth and gender dimension, as well as the voice from the farm. I hope seeding goes well in the weeks ahead. I know it's already late over here. With regards to all of these excellent views, I'd now like to call on Dr. Christine Negra, who is a special advisor to the UN Foundation. And Christine will lead us through the questions and answers. Christine, over to you.
Thank you so much, Robin. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be involved. And, I think that it's really exciting to be part of something that's called a training session. I think that the speakers so far, I've been listening carefully, taking a lot of notes, have really offered some tangible directions. And so I think we'd like to use this Q&A to the extent that we can to pick up on some of those. And so I'd like to start, if I can, by going back first to Lindewe and just picking up on one of the key pieces from your comments, this idea of continuous food access over the entire year, not just after harvest and so on. So what have we learned about strategies that work to get that continuous food access? Lindewe?
Thanks, Christine. What have we learned? I'll speak more to Africa. We've learned that for countries that have invested in agriculture, for countries that have met the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program framework target of 10% of the national budget devoted to agriculture, these success stories. The farmers have access to inputs, that seed, fertilizer, and pesticides they need. The farmers have aggregation points. The farmers have technologies for reducing food waste and loss, both on farm and off farm. And there's emphasis now on value addition. So investing in primary production in a sustainable way does pay. We've got lessons from Senegal, from Rwanda. Malawi did achieve that a bit. So yes, there are examples where we say it can be done and we can scale up on those success stories.
That's really useful, and I think probably we'll talk a bit more about this in the interactive session later. Thank you so much. Anna, if I can come to you, and your remarks really motivated this issue of how should we eat and the need for dietary shifts. And so I was hoping that we could hear just a little bit more from you, perhaps if you have a good example of real progress, because we've been talking about dietary shifts for a few years now. Where can we look to see some bright light, some place where the right mix of policy and investment and other elements have really come together? Anna?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. I think sometimes, when we see the issues about the numbers that are undernourished and not having enough food, then that is actually influencing policies in terms of produce more food, more cereals, more staples. But if you look at the distribution, you can see that actually the other side of the problem, which is not the micronutrient deficiency, not having access to the quality diet, is actually now getting bigger. We can actually kill two birds with one stone, by making sure that we also invest, just as we have invested in staple crops, cereals, we need to also invest in the production of the fruits and vegetables and all of that and make them affordable and also easy for households to get them. Fruits and vegetables currently are so expensive. Governments have to make a deliberate effort to make sure that the foods that we want people to eat to remain healthy are also affordable. At the moment, we are talking about healthy diets, but for majority of the people, it's not affordable. So that means that we will not be able to reach our sustainable development goals. SDG 2, also good health, we will not be able to unless we look at addressing the two together. Address hunger, address also the problem of a quality diet not being accessible. And the two must go together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. I think that's really clear. I think that, again, this is another topic that will probably come up later in the session. We do have some questions starting to come in through the chat. And I think if it's Kirti Singh, if you're able to come on and ask your question, I have a feeling based on your chat comment that it might go to either Craig or Rick, but obviously anyone can answer. Kirti, are you able to pose your question? And maybe just come off mute if you can. While we're waiting, why don't I go ahead and do my best to pose it for you, and you can put in the chat any clarification if you need. So again, I think Craig, Rick, maybe one of you might pick this up. The question is about hydroponics and aquaponics, and I assume it's about the potential to mobilize these approaches to address food system transformation. So Craig or Rick, would you like to take that?
Yes, this is Craig here. Great question. I do think that we need to be looking at all the various types of production that we can make in terms of food systems. The demands are so large that we can't leave anything off the table. I think hydroponics, aquaponics is an option. I mean, nothing is the end all be all, is a silver bullet. But I think for some of the reasons you mentioned, for certain types of food categories and for certain environmental and health reasons, aquaponics makes sense. So I think it's one of those that we should be, one of those arrows we should be adding to our quiver of how to sustainably feed the planet.
Fabulous, thanks. And Rick, any input on that?
No, I don't really have anything to add to that, other than that is certainly part of investment and innovation, and all those options need to be explored. So whatever we can do to help that along as a global community, it's well worth the investment, I believe. All forms of agriculture are important in this day and age.
Certainly, and I think diversity has been mentioned by several people so far on the panel, and I think you know, the diversity on the production side is really not just the what's being produced, but the way that it's being produced is something that's going to be very context specific. We do continue to have questions, so if you've put a question in the chat, please do try to be ready to come off mute and pose your question. Yuko Miyazaki has a question. Yuko, are you ready to pose that question? Okay, why don't I go ahead? You know, apologies for if I don't understand the technology perfectly. But so the question here is, how do we realize less food waste and starvation? And so maybe Anna and Lindewe, I think your remarks may have most closely related to the question that either of you like to speak about how to actually accomplish it.
I can come in there, Christine. So how do we reduce food waste? I think for us, particularly in Africa, the starting point is measurement. We waste because we do not measure and set targets for production. So we need good metrics on farm, because most of the waste, the loss happens on farm, particularly post-harvest, during harvesting and storage stage. Number two, I think it's investment in technologies. We are still using a lot of manual labor. We are still using a lot of traditional structures for storage. So we need to modernize our agriculture in order to reduce the losses. Number three, it's the issue of the pull factor, the markets. Unless we produce for a market, the produce is stored either on farm or at the household level or in aggregation centers, and it continues to deteriorate in quality and quantity. So when you produce for a market, the off-takers are ready to take the produce and move it straight to value addition or for onward marketing. So for me, those are the three things we will need to look at. Metrics for measurement, investment in modern technologies that will reduce the wastage, and three, strengthening our markets so that anything that comes from the farm goes to the next level, the pull factor. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindewe. Thanks for getting it.
Anna, I'd like to add on to this topic of food waste briefly. Is that okay?
Oh, please do, Anna, yes.
So I think if you look at the distribution of food waste, a lot of it is seen in high and middle income countries. And this is because people tend to buy too much. The other reason is that food is very cheap in some of these areas, that they do not really put a lot of value on the food. If you look at all the resources, the energy, the water, the land, all that goes into food, and yet food ends up not being respected. I think wasting food is not giving respect to food, because it's so cheap. We get it so cheap in some part of the world. And that's why also it ends up being so much wasted. So we need to think about all the effort that have gone into food, that food really is not cheap, and we must respect it. Thank you.
You know, and that just makes me think about the remarks from the special envoy about food is more than, and I think this idea of value and what kind of value it takes, you've spoken to really nicely. There is another question coming in that I think would probably be good for Natasha, and it's someone, Srishant, if I'm saying the name correctly. If that person's able to come on and ask the question, great. Otherwise, I'll just kind of throw it up there.
Yeah, I'm Srichan. Actually, I wanted to know about certain actions or steps which certain governments and administrations can take, so that the price of the food items will not rise as well as fall. Both will affect. If the farmer is not getting sufficient price for it, if it falls, then he will stop producing that food, that grain or anything, something like that. So similarly, if it rises, then it will affect the poor. So both will affect the food security. So is there any advisory or what all steps we can take to keep a check on that?
Thank you. And Natasha, if you want to take the first crack at that, that would be great.
Sorry, apologies, challenges in unmuting myself. Thanks, Christine. And I will say that the question was a little bit patchy, but let me see if I got it. I think it was around the potential implications of rising prices in the current context. And I did see on the chat there was also a related question, I think, on sort of trade policy as well, and tariffs, which I think is somewhat related. I'll caveat this by saying I'm not the expert on trade policy and pricing, but clearly I think there's been a lot of reflection. The current pandemic, at least, is a little bit different from 10 years ago when we had the food price crisis of 2007, 2008. And some of you may recall that was a sort of a real wicked combination of both increased supply and limited demand, because at that time the global food stocks were not so healthy. Analysts are saying that presently we have a slightly better situation in that global food stocks are adequate. But clearly what's critical with respect to potential price impacts locally is trying to ensure that trade policies are not restrictive or don't tend to try and protect the situation domestically, because that can have sort of knock-on global implications and then start to skew some of the markets and start to drive some of those food price increases as other countries also start to sort of panic and protect. My understanding right now is that the situation is not too bad. We know that there have been some efforts, joint ministerial and regional efforts to try and commit to keeping the flow of food and goods as open as possible. We do know that there have been some country-specific responses where restrictions have been introduced, which are not optimal, but we also know that I think there have been recent positive developments. I think in Cambodia just recently, the ban on export of rice was recently lifted. So some of these global trade policy decisions and actions by governments very much have domestic effects, which can contribute to some of those price fluctuations. And also right now, I think presently we're really seeing how it's the domestic supply chains which are causing also very localized price fluctuations. And really, that's, the containment, agriculture is a high labor industry. And with the restrictions on movement and so on, that's clearly affecting production and supply chains. So to the extent that countries and governments are able to introduce guidelines for the food system as an essential service with protections for the safety of individuals to try and unblock some of those bottlenecks and allow things to continue, that would contribute to sort of hopefully smoothing the prices locally. I hope that sort of somewhat addressed your question. Thank you.
That's perfect, Natasha. Thank you. And I think because of time, we're probably at the end of our Q&A right now. So I'll just thank all the speakers very much, and also just make one final comment. So Director Suazo at the beginning talked about the capacity to survive. So and the need to reflect and come together. And I feel that this grouping of experts that have just now participated in this training are really part of that. So what we heard really was very little about describing the problem. And I think every one of these speakers really spoke to the potential solutions. So I think using occasions like this, and this is part of a larger series, is really part of doing exactly what the director suggested, which is reflect, draw in the very vast experience that this panel just hints at globally, and then bringing that together, reflecting together, seeing what the intersection points are for investment, for policy, for community-based approaches, for empowering youth and women in agriculture, and the many other points that were raised. So I think I'm going to call this Q&A and this entire panel a success, because I certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure that others did. So I'll turn it back to you, Robin, to continue to the next session.
Thanks so much, Christine. That was an outstanding job of moderating. Lots of activity in the group chat. We'll try and pick up on some of those themes in the remaining 40 minutes of this session. And all our thanks to the panel for a truly outstanding job. Hear, hear, and I see that coming through on the chat as well. We're going to do some interactive elements now, and the great thing is the panel has given you clues. We're going to almost test now if you were listening, but there are some really important elements in any UNITAR training, and the point is to give people exposure to the issues and the particular topics that we're working on. So today, we're going to pull up a series of questions, and I'll get the next slide, please. In particular, we're going to draw on the state of food security and nutrition in the world, which is a major report, and the SOPHI report that is done by the Food and Agriculture Organization along with the other Rome-based agencies, the World Food Program and the International Fund for Agricultural Development, as well as UNICEF, are all involved in putting these excellent statistics together. And they're really important to have a grasp on them, to understand the context of how things are working in the food systems. So next slide, please. We're going to be doing more of these polls. So everyone should get their computer fingers ready. And we're going to put forward a poll now. How many people in the world do not have enough food to eat? Sophie, if you could launch the poll. So we'll get all of you voting. As you're voting, I want to thank many of my colleagues for the various aspects of this program that they've been working on. We've had Sophie running the polls, and you're going to have a whole series of polls now. We'll give you a few more minutes, lots of people voting still. This one should be an easy one since we mentioned this number a few times. Virtually all the panelists talked about it. Oh, and Steve is giving things away in the chat room. All right, we'll wrap up that poll, 5 more seconds. And we'll share the results. So of course, everybody caught on perfectly well. It was more than 800 million people. It's about 820 million people right now. And stop sharing the results if you could. We'll just talk a little bit about how serious that is. Now, if you think about this, this is our traditional list of absolute hunger. It is people who are not getting enough calories to eat. Linda Way mentioned something very important during the discussion, which is that if you consider people who have not just an average through the year, but people who may be food insecure, for instance, they're in a rural area, they have a time of plenty after harvest, but then they don't have enough food through the course of the entire year, and they have periods of 3 months or more of food insecurity. That number extends to 1.3 billion people. It's really a shocking level. And with that, let's think about our next question. So in which region in the world do you have the most number of food insecure people? And we'll launch that poll now. And while that poll's running, just to say to everyone, thank you very much to my colleague Irina, who is running the back end of the PowerPoint. She's been fantastic in keeping all of the elements moving for me and all the panelists. And people are coming on to vote quickly. Let's give you another 10 seconds to vote. All right, here are the results. So the vote was overwhelmingly Africa, but I think all of you have a surprise. So we'll pause the results and we'll go to the answer. So the answer is in fact Asia in total numbers actually is by far the area of the world with the largest number of people who are in absolute food insecurity, and that moderate to severe food insecurity when it's over a 3-month period during the course of the year. we're looking at 1.3 billion just in Asia alone. Many of you answered Africa, and if you look at the size of the dots, you'll see the red dot in Africa and even the yellow dot of temporarily food insecure is actually the most the largest as the total proportion of that continent. But that's why you would have the impression related to Africa being the largest, but in fact it's Asia that's the largest. And of course, anybody in these red and yellow dots is something that we need to tackle as the United Nations, as a world. On to the next question. The number of undernourished people in the world has been decreasing since 2015 and is back at levels seen in 2010 and 2011. Is this true or false? If everyone can start voting. And as they're voting, I'll just note that is there a certificate that post in UNITAR? There is not a UNITAR certificate, but the UNITAR team are on the line. We'll get Pelayo, if you want to come on the line, you can let them know about UNITAR certificates.
Yes, we can issue a certificate for the course. They will be, I'll leave my email in the chat so anybody could email me and request for the certificate with their full name, please.
Excellent, thank you, Pelayo. And we'll give this just 10 more seconds. We see, oh, it's shifting around, it's complicated. All right, why don't we go ahead and wrap up and share those results. So this was pretty even, you will see. But in fact, after years of decrease, and if you think back even 30 or 40 years, 30% of the world's population was going hungry. That number is down significantly proportionately, and it had been going down fairly consistently for quite some period of time. But actually, since 2015, we have seen the number of hungry in the world go up consistently for 4 years. We are truly, as Rick said, going backwards on SDG 2. And on to our next question. The progress on malnutrition is too slow to achieve the 2025 and 2030 global nutrition targets. Which target is furthest behind? There are World Health Assembly targets on low birth weight, exclusive breastfeeding of children under 6 months, stunting of children under 5 years, wasting of children under 5 years, anemia in women of reproductive age, and obesity in adults. So which target is furthest behind its goal? Get you voting. Oh, and people are struggling with this question. The answers are all over the place. Furthest behind. And next, while we have a bit of time while people are casting their votes, we'll give you another 15 seconds to cast your votes. I can see that you're thinking hard. So yes, the session is being recorded. We do hope to post it or portions of it online. And with regard to the presentations, we can make those available. That's great. And we'll post the Sophie report link in the chat room shortly. I'll ask my colleague Jacob to do that. And I want to thank Jacob. He's been handling some of the tweeting and getting all of the great links and handles out. So thank you so much, Jacob. So go ahead and share the results. And on the whole, people thought we were furthest behind on obesity, followed by stunting. And if we take a look at the results, We can see that this is this complicated chart because there are a lot of elements here. But if we look at obesity, you can see that our goal is to drop the number of obese, and in fact, it has gone up slightly against the target, which has the little red dot there. So you're right, we are behind on obesity, but it is not the one where we are most behind. It's actually the one next to that. Anemia, we are supposed to be dropping the total number of women who are facing anemia who are of reproductive age. Of course, this has a huge consequence on both the mother's welfare, but also that of the unborn children and the breastfed children. So here you can see that that number is going up even more than any of the other numbers on this chart. And in fact, it's supposed to be going down. So it is the most significantly behind. Let's look at some areas that are a little bit more good news. We do have over on the column in the green on breastfeeding, we have a goal of increasing the number of people who are being breastfed in the first 6 months of their lives. We have a long way to go to get to that goal, but you can see that at least the trend of the past few years is that it is going up. If we look at stunting, the other one that you discussed, we can see that stunting is going down, aligned with the trend. Of course, any children that are stunted or wasted not only are short in stature, but have permanent long-term effects on their health and well-being. That can be their cognitive abilities, that can be actually their tendency for overweight. So continuing to focus on all of these is very important. And do keep in mind that the one we're furthest behind on, as per the discussion we just had, was anemia. Next question, please. More than 35% of the global adult population is overweight. True or false? We'll launch that poll. This one should be easy. You only have 2 choices, so we'll give you a little less time to vote on this one. Oh, and there's a strong consensus coming in on this. Last 5 seconds to vote. About 2/3 of you have voted. Okay, Sophie, if you're willing to end the poll, we'll share those results. And 83% of you said that that was true. So let's look at the numbers. So indeed, we have 38.9% of the population is overweight. A shocking statistic, equally shocking, 40 million children are overweight who are under 5 years of age, and 131 in the 5 to 9 years of age, and 207 million in the 10 to 19-year-old range. So this speaks to everything that Anna was speaking about earlier. It's incredibly important that we focus on diverse, healthy diets, and that we also consider that it is not just a question of abundance, but it is a question of getting a good, healthy start to your diet. And that's why we're seeing some of these questions where stunting and wasting or periods of hunger can exaggerate the impact of obesity, because those systems, your biomes in your guts, aren't functioning as well. So it's not a question that if you're privileged, you will never, that you only have to deal with obesity. If you are underprivileged in some way and have had a period of food insecurity, you may also later in life face obesity. And next question. So here, actually, it's not a next question. We are going to make you do a different kind of interaction. And with this, we're going to pull up a mural. My colleague Mumbi is going to show a whiteboard, and we want all of you to feel free to interact. So if you're feeling ready to speak up, take yourself off mute. We'll see if there's too much interference on the line. But we're going to share a virtual whiteboard and talk a little bit about what are the components of a global food system. And we're going to get you to help us put that food system kind of in the order in which food is produced. So we put a few different sort of sticky notes here. One is basic processing, another are consumers, one is food service, seeds and inputs, extension services, this is giving rural advice to farmers, processing, production or farming is right up front, and then retail and trade and logistics and storage. Can we get one of our panelists to help us anchor? What would be the very end of the food system? Natasha, could I trouble you to give us a stab at what might be position number 10 on that chain?
Robin, forgive me, I'm actually struggling a little bit to see this. I have, because my...
Yeah, there we go, a little zooming in to help.
Thank you. Sorry, because I'm on a small device because our work system doesn't allow me to use Zoom from a laptop, so I'm staring at a telephone. Okay, let me try and... So maybe could you walk us through how is this organized? Apologies.
Well, right now it's not organized, and we're going to work together to organize it. So I was, for instance, where would these go? So we're trying to start with the very end of the system, which might be after somebody leaves the store, for instance. What would be
okay? So from the sort of consumer end all the way through to the sort of production end.
Exactly. So we're going to end with the consumer because that's sort of the last place of consumption.
Right.
So maybe we could move the consumer to number.
Yeah, the consumer to the very end, exactly.
So since we sort of cheated on that one, how would you feel about giving us what you think might be the start of that? So what would be number one?
Number one, I guess production and farming should be number one. Oh no, seed and inputs. Well,
I'd be inclined to agree with you on that. Yeah. But why don't we get some other people hopping in here? Thanks, Natasha. I'm sorry for making you the guinea pig.
No, that's all right. I'm sorry for my tiny device.
Well, and Mumbi has ably increased this. So someone else want to pop on? John Raphael Artetes, I hope I'm saying that properly. Do you want to pop on and give us a suggestion about what you think should be next in the supply chain, which is really a food system? So production and farming via chat. If you could move that one, Mumbi, up to number 2. And do feel free to take the floor verbally or in the chat room. So what do people think would be next on the supply chain or the food system? Basic processing and trade and logistics.
I would suggest extension services.
Excellent. Okay. Extension services to number 3. And then basic processing according to Sri Kathansky.
I'm not sure if we do that before storage.
Well, and in fact, someone else has come in and said trade and logistics before basic processing. So basic processing might move to number 5. And then trade and logistics. And they're quite rightly suggesting that there could be more trade and logistics in between basic processing. And then after that, people are saying processing comes. So we won't copy trade and logistics. Oh, it does. You're brilliant, Mumbi.
But at what stage do you store?
Well, great question. What's your answer, Lindue? I recognize your voice.
Yes, it's me. So you produce, harvest, store. You
produce, harvest, store. So we need to move in between trade and logistics. We need to move over there. Yeah.
Then you start drawing store for marketing, for trade, for processing.
Perfect. Maybe you are brilliant at this. So I think she's suggesting, Lindue, are you suggesting storage comes before trade and logistics?
Yes, because you only trade what you've stored and you know the quantities, and you only process once things are in store.
Spoken like a true farmer. One of the questions is the definition of extension services. So these are experts who work in rural areas, go out and visit farmers and help explain to them how to test their soil, how to manage their soil health, what kinds of seeds might work well, good crop rotations. So they're like the specialists who give rural advisory services to farmers. So then if we have a next question on where do retail and food service go? So food service is...
Excuse me, Robin. What about extension services on what seeds to use, what inputs to use? It's both before and during the production stage.
Excellent. We can copy an extra one and put it over there or right at the beginning. And we haven't talked about land tenure, which isn't part of the supply chain per se, but underpins all of this is access to land and water resources. So we're seeing food service and then retail, or they might even, since we have 9 spots on the chart, they might even go on top of each other because, oh, no, I think it was before consumer, sorry. So the retail might mean you're getting something in a grocery store and then you're making it at home. Food service might mean that you're going to a restaurant and then eating it. But sometimes those retailers also supply the food service as well. Lindue, any flaws in the logic of this food system?
Good.
Good. Excellent. Rick, if you're still on the line. Christine?
So we're only using the posters that we have, right?
That was the plan, but there are extra blank ones in case you have something else you want to add. Did you want to add one? Waste management, excellent. So we could add waste management or to the end of the consumer chain. Very excellent point from the audience.
One of the panelists also spoke about dietary guidelines. Does that have a place here?
Why don't we put it with land tenure in the sense that it's not a service or an actor in a sort of conventional way, but it definitely, like land tenure, is part of that underpinning system, isn't it?
Fantastic.
And then legislation management, so legislation and regulation also can be in that underpinning environment. Great. And a further point that waste management could be copied and put on top of processing as another area where it needs to happen. And then quality checks. You guys are fantastic in a chat room. What a great, quiet audience, but so active as we go. And an excellent question is self-production kind of like farming? So we could put self-production on the production and farming piece, Mumbi, and you're keeping up brilliantly. Could you put self-production in the word self in front of production and self? Great, that or where you've got it is wonderful. And then one last thought, and then we'll wrap this up and go to our last set of questions. Soil sampling is wildly important, definitely. So we need to do something on soil health, and we don't have an extra spare sticky note, but post-harvest management is another part of that underpinning system that isn't necessarily one actor, but is about making sure that we get that right system going. And I see Marco taking a picture. Marco, did you have a thought about this? Oh, I think you're on mute, Marco.
I said it's very interesting, and I said at the beginning I'm going to be learning today, so I am taking pictures because I am really motivated. This is great. It's a great exercise.
Fantastic. Well, it's all due to Mumbi's excellent management of the virtual whiteboard and all the great comments of the audience.
Robin,
Yes, Lindue.
There's the issue of policy, which is always an overarching issue in all this. I know you want specifics, but where do we put conducive policy environment right through the system?
Well, that's almost that underpinning second layer in yellow stickies, isn't it? Because land tenure, it's got legislation and regulation, but that conducive policy environment is the second part, the system in which the system operates. Fantastic. Thanks, Lindue. So we'll pause here, and I just want to reiterate that a food system is thinking about every step of the way. A food system isn't working if a farmer can't get a decent living wage for what they do. A food system isn't working if they're not getting the extension services to do the kinds of actions that Craig was talking about to protect water or make sure that they're using land appropriately. It's not working if the processors aren't able to get a healthier product into the hands of people. And we saw an interesting conversation earlier about the fact that food processing is really important when we need shelf-stable food after something like the pandemic has disrupted food chains, but it's also potentially overused in some marketplaces. So making sure that there's a good balance between getting a diverse diet into people's hands involves every part of this, including the retailers and the food service people. And Anna talked really effectively about the importance of consumers making good choices in their diets. And then managing that food loss and waste, which Craig spoke about so well during the conversation. So a great job on the part of the panel to touch on virtually every aspect of this food system as well. So now we're going to ask you one more important question. And if we can go back to the PowerPoint, Irina. And we'll just pull that forward. And thanks again, Mumbi. That was a super well done job on that mural. Great job. Components of the global food system. So we've heard talk about all sorts of things that we might do during the Food System Summit. Zach talked a bit about the fact that they are going to be focused on action, that it isn't a big negotiated outcome. It's really about getting people motivated to tackle the elements of SDG 2 and all the SDGs within the food system to be successful at creating a better, healthier food system. So we heard people talk about food for all. Lindue spoke about that very compellingly. We heard a discussion about healthy people, which Dr. Larte spoke about very effectively. Nature positive production, Craig spoke about that both in the form of climate and soil management as well as environment and biodiversity. We've heard two different elements there. Fair and economically efficient and resilient food systems. So how do we make sure that farmers make a living and that food is broadly available in the system? How do we do finance and investment, which Rick spoke about? And he also spoke about fair and economically resilient food systems, as did Natasha. And then I think throughout, we heard people pause and say, in the face of COVID, do we need to talk about the resiliency of our supply chains? So you have a challenge. There will probably be 3 to 5 action tracks during the food system, but we're going to put a poll forward and you get to choose just one, mostly because the polling system only allows you to choose one. So I'm going to give you a bit longer to think about this one because it's really a tough question. But please go ahead and vote. If you got to pick one thing to recommend to Agnes Kalibata, the Special Envoy for the Food System Summit, what would you recommend she pick as an action pathway? And Zach's already said that he's super keen to see these answers. He'll be happy to take them back when they're done. Oh, and lots of votes all over the place. Healthy People got an early start, but it's now a very diverse list so far. I can see the votes coming in. So thus far, about half of you have voted. So we will give you a bit longer on this one because it's hard to choose. It is hard to choose because we need all action in all these areas. Great. Excellent. 5 more seconds and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, we'll share those results. So very complex answers. As you can see, the voting is spread quite far across the range of options, but the one that came up strongest and first was fair and economically efficient and resilient food systems. So a credit to Natasha's point earlier on that all of this must be underpinned by a system in which people are compensated and development is allowed to occur in a broad range of places. I know we have a large contingent on the call from India. If you think about farmers as being broadly 1/3 of the population, 2/3 of the population in India, but 1/3 of the GDP, you really see that 2/3 of your population are not getting access to as much economic support as they need. And this is true actually all over the world. It is hard to make a living as a farmer. And then that underpins insecurities that build out into whether or not people get access to food for all. And that was the one that came in second on this, as well as Healthy People. And of course, the vote was somewhat split between nature positive agriculture, environment and biodiversity. We're hearing all sorts of questions about how to bundle up the question of planetary health getting into the Food Systems Summit. And Natasha is noting that she's going to have to drop off the call, but just to say a special shout out and thanks to her, especially during a time when there's a replenishment underway for the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program. We wish you all the best, Natasha. We hope that that gets refunded very quickly. It could never be more important than at this moment.
Many thanks, Rob.
Thank you. So with that, we're going to put out some time for some final comments on what people think would be a good topic for the Food Systems Summit. We can stop sharing those results and we'll take either interventions from the floor by voice or if you have some questions in the chat room. If you were Dr. Kalibata, what would you want to do with the Food Systems Summit? Christine, any thoughts?
You know, I think one of the things that I was observing over the course of the session today is that there are many different communities working very hard and with a lot of passion, as was said earlier, and that the summit, in a way, suggests to me an opportunity for those communities to, both in advance, as Zach mentioned, and at the summit itself, to find the points of commonality, to sort of be hooking together the things that they've learned from their approaches and their direct experiences, and to use the summit and especially the lead up to really identify the places where we do have disconnects or false dichotomies, as you talked about earlier, and to really see where those are serving us and where they're not, and to try to find the most kind of practical pilot approaches, collaborations, and eventually really sort of strong programmatic approaches to move past that to really a food systems approach rather than kind of a constellation of approaches.
You're here. I think that's exactly the goal. We have a few experts on the line. I'd like to call on Elise Golan and then Modest Miro, and then we'll pick up some of the questions that are starting to flow in the chat. Elise, anything you'd add for the planning of the Food Systems Summit?
Yes, I mean, I think the Food System Summit is a wonderful opportunity for us all to focus, first of all, on a systems approach, to really think holistically how all of these different pieces in the food system, how they all come together to obtain, to meet these objectives we're all agreed on, either as expressed in the SDGs or even the themes that you put up on the screen today for us to vote on. So yes, all I can say is I'm really looking forward to the Food System Summit. And as I say, I think this whole notion of a systems approach, thinking systematically about the food system, is really an important contribution of this new narrative that we're all starting to use. Thanks, Robin.
Nicely said. Modest, you have had a lot of experience both in the negotiation of the SDGs, but also in your own work, your interest in rural and urban agriculture, that you've always had a feel for both. We're seeing lots of questions in the chat about that. Can you give us some of your thoughts?
Yes, thank you very much, Robin, for this interesting seminar. I think we have come up with a lot of interactions between food systems and what it entails as cross-cutting issues. And I think that the totality, what should be actually done is to ensure that we see the activities of developing food system to be partnership between government and private sector, so much that no one is left behind, like the SDGs is saying. And because all goals, as one of the experts said in this session, are actually involved. And because all the goals are part and parcel of food system, then clearly the intention should be to ensure that we encompass all the matters that actually ensure that no one is left behind by 2030.
Thanks, absolutely. And I think that this goes to that false dichotomy between rural and urban. There is more and more activity. Urban centers obviously work well for higher value crops like hydroponics, like aquaculture, that can be produced near that market, that need to be fresh, that probably won't in any time in the future replace the role for production of livestock and crops in more rural areas. And understanding the best use of the urban footprint to create jobs for food production there, as well as the importance of creating processing and opportunity jobs for employment in rural areas, is very important. And knowing this, we have a whole series that we'll be doing between now and the Food Systems Summit in conjunction with UNITAR. We're so thrilled. We'll have another one coming up on agriculture and biodiversity in July. In October, climate smart agriculture, breaking barriers on women in digital agriculture, and science and technology for SDG 2. We saw lots of innovation questions so far, and reducing food loss and waste in July. So there is lots more to discuss. We really appreciate having you here, and we will be having a poll for your response. The team is actually going to be taking a look at how you enjoyed this session. So we look forward to UNITAR sending out a little questionnaire for you on that, and we look forward to your thoughts about what we can do to best serve you on the next session. So with that, many, many thanks, and final word to you, Marco.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you very much for making this event possible. Participation was amazing. I see the interest that people had in this topic. We have this summit coming up from the Secretary General, and I see how much is interlinked with our own survival. I guess one of the things that we learned during this crisis, as I said at the beginning, is that we come together and we came in very innovative ways and very resilient. I detected a lot of questions and comments for the future. And I said at the beginning that I think that the visions that they had at the summit this pandemic, we like it or not, it will reshape a little bit the basic concept or ideas they had when it comes up. So for me, it is important that keep on these exchanges, keep on the people talking out, to put in their own ideas together in order, if not to influence, at least to make their voice heard about what they are concerned. And I guess these series that you mentioned we're going to develop are going to be very, very, very useful, because we interact with the high official of the Secretariat as well as the private sectors, grassroots level organizations like NGOs, like yours, which is doing an amazing job. So you can count with us in anything of these initiatives. We already agree on develop this series. Hopefully for maybe September, October, we will have a different format. For sure, July will be also video conferencing by Zoom. We will promote through our website, unitar.org, in the New York office, through your platform, Robbie, to Emerging. We reach the delegates, we reach the staff of the Secretariat. And yes, I think this is an incredible opportunity in this particular topic to shape a little bit the future on the food production system that we need to rethink, not only from the production phase and to consuming phase, also the impact on environment and climate change. There is too much to say, and we have to come ourselves as individuals. We have to change ourselves in the way we consume and how we process food in our own households. We have to change ourselves in order to do that, in order to avoid waste and to help somebody else. So this is what I wanted to say. I'm very grateful to you, to your organization, to your staff, amazing job, to Unitar staff, amazing job also. And please keep looking at the website, and we will reach you out by email. Let us know those who wanted to have the humble certificate. We will provide it and then to you. And all those to register with us and with Emerging will be reach out by July next video conferencing. So that's all I wanted to say, and thank you very much for your engaging and participation today. Robbie, back to you.
Thanks, everybody. Stay well, eat well, and look forward to the next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.